So once again, a very warm welcome to this webinar focused on city-led international cultural mobility. My name is Marie Le Sourd, and I am the Secretary General of On the Move, the international advocacy and information network focused on the mobility of artists and cultural professionals. We collaborate with HowlRound for this webinar. That allow us to have this web streaming, and we collaborate as well with the National Captioning Institute that allow us to have real people doing the captions. So Rebecca and Sean are with us to do the captioning in English at the bottom of your screen. So you can click on the button CC to have this live caption, and you can also access to an external document where all the captions are also shared. And this link is shared by my colleague Bernardo Queiroz. So just last time, could you, for all of you that are joining, please join, of course, but could you switch off your camera and your sound so that we can have a real focus on our moderator and speaker. A last point I wanted also to say is that, of course, there will be a discussion between the moderator and the speaker. There will be also time for Q&A, so don't worry, you will have also the time to share your question and your suggestion. Now, without further ado, I would like to pass the word to the moderator of this webinar, who is Dr. Beatriz Garcia, and she will then introduce the different speakers for this webinar. So a few words about Dr. Beatriz Garcia. She's a leading expert in international cultural policy and mega events, specializing in multidimensional research and evaluation framework. She has over 2 decades of experience in which she contributed to shape global discussion on culture-led regeneration, Olympic Cultural Program, and the European Capital of Culture Initiative, or ECoC. I am naming this acronym because I think this acronym will come up in the discussion. And just a last point about Beatriz, we met, I think 1.5 years ago in a Culture Next meeting in Cluj. So this is also maybe another network that we will also mention in this meeting. So I pass the floor to you, Beatriz, and I wish you a very good discussion with Kelly, Jordi, and Julie. Thank you very much.
Merci, Marie, and well, good morning or good afternoon to everyone. I'm joining you from a very sunny Liverpool. So this is exceptional circumstances. Very pleased to see, yes, how many of you are coming along. I'm trying to see, keeping the count of how many cities we have around for the day. So as Marie was mentioning, we have around 90 minutes. So we have until midnight, 12:30 in the Central European times for this discussion. And we are going to have a first extensive block to have a discussion with our panelists. But to make you comfortable, I think it would be great to start by having you with a chat. If you could mention which cities you are joining us from, I think that would be really interesting to see how broad and diverse we are on this session. Here we are, thank you. So yes, as Marie was mentioning, for me, it's now getting into 27 years working with cities across the globe. I document, interrogate, and capture the impact of major cultural interventions and their medium to long-term legacies. And my driver has been the mega event or the one-off, which brings a very interesting set of circumstances. And we will see with some of our panelists how that applies. No? So with the European Capital of Culture model, for instance, the ECoC, and how this differs from festivals that happen at a local level and are a regular occurrence. But I also do a lot of work around cultural policy and cultural strategy formation and how it affects evaluation frameworks. And I think certainly in Europe and across the globe, these developments are amazing, especially for the last couple of decades. And the notion of international relations and cultural diplomacy is quite important here. And certainly mobility, the mobility of artists and the mobility of cultural professionals is also very relevant. And finally, the city angle. I'm very keen, and interesting also, how we define cities at the different sizes that we represent, how that also provides a very valuable lens, no? When we discuss notions of place making, place representation. So the name of the session is City-Led International Cultural Mobility Programs. And we were given quite a free rein. So we are not going to be having actual presentations or position statements. What we want is a real conversation. And this will happen, I know for a fact, because we have already had some previous discussion because of the quality of the panel that is joining us today. We have 3 experts that bring really different perspectives, and all of them have quite a long trajectory behind them. And very curious as well how our human-typed captions will allow us just to get really the gist of everything we have to cover. We have 3 networks or 3 types of initiatives also represented here, from Eurocities to the European Capital of Culture Programme, and also United Cities and local governments. And we will try to bring you over through the chat function. So you are very welcome to make comments whilst we speak, because this will take us probably around half an hour of interaction with the panelists, maybe up to 50 minutes. But I would be keen to see if there are comments, if there are areas that catch your attention, please do share them with us. And we will make sure this also is part of our pre-discussion within the panel and then of our broader Q&A. I'm hoping to protect 40 minutes for the Q&A, and that all of you ideally can be with us until the very end of the session. So let's start with our first panelist. She's Julie Hervé. She's the head of culture and democracy at Eurocities. And yes, if I see you here, I'm just trying to see how many screens I have in front of me. I think we're going to have her bio copied into the chat. I don't know if Marie or one in the team can put some notes around Julie's background. There you have it. I would like to start with a kind of basic question for you, Julie, that is about Eurocities itself as a network and your support to international cultural mobility programs. Please.
Yes, hello, Beatriz, Kelly, Jordi, Marie, and thank you very much for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be there, and I'm live from Brussels, also very sunny today. So a couple of words about Eurocities, and please interrupt if there are any questions. So it's the European network of large cities. By large, we understand cities with usually a bit more than 200,000 inhabitants. And it's a network that was founded 40 years ago, so a well-established and grown-up one, that brings together 220-something European cities, including all capital cities. We are based in Brussels because one of our objectives is to advocate for cities at EU level. So our job is to meet European commissioners, members of the European Parliament, and explain what challenges cities are facing on the ground, so this can be tackled in future EU policies and programs. We work on all urban policy areas, and I'm focusing my work on culture and also on democracy. When it comes to the mobility of artists, I think there are 2 main aspects on which we are working. As a network, Eurocities brings together mayors, deputy mayors in charge of culture and other urban areas, but also colleagues working in city administrations. And for them, we do have a series of knowledge sharing events, online or on-site. For example, last year we focused very much on future cultural spaces in cities and how they will look like in the future. So this results in a publication that you can find on our website and any other very practical tools for local practitioners. And this year we are going to focus on freedom of expression, because this is a challenge that many cities are facing. You know, the global landscape is changing at the moment, and cities are really at the front line. Maybe then I want to first focus on how cities and why cities are supporting the mobility of artists and cultural professionals.
Yes.
Yes, I think the why is very important, and I think there are mostly four reasons. The first one is the growing importance of culture in international policies. I think the second one is to support artistic innovation, to offer local practitioners an opportunity to go abroad and see what's happening abroad, and also to bring artists from abroad to renew the local art and culture offering. So really innovate, being a little bit more innovative at local level. And this is also linked to city attractiveness. And here, I think cities really see artists and cultural professionals as ambassadors of their city abroad. So it's a nice, I think it's a nice concept. And of course, the idea is also to expand cultural audiences and markets. And we sometimes speak about the concept of territorial diplomacy or diplomacy of local governments. And I think a real strength of all the actions developed by cities on the mobility of artists and culture professionals is really the direct link that they have with artists and local organization, which might be a little bit more challenging when it's supported by EU or national institutions. So the information I'm going to share now has been collected. It's not just coming from me. It's a result of long-term work and discussion with our member cities, because we wanted to understand what are, or if there are disciplines that are most frequently funded by cities when it comes to mobility of artists and cultural professionals. And the top three are visual arts, the performing arts, and mostly theater and music. This is what we found out. And then the question is, how do cities support the mobility of artists and cultural professionals? So the first thing is that the mobility is increasingly becoming a priority, and it is mentioned in local strategies for culture, and it's mentioned that in the political text and action plans that cities are updating on a regular basis. So it is important for cities.
So can I, yes, just a point there. And by the way, those of you that maybe are not on the chat, all kinds of resources are being shared there. So there is information on Eurocities and some background notes. Yeah, I'm interested in that in terms of the notion of current trends. So what is changing? Because if you have been working with the network for how long now? So you have been there.
I've been there for 20 years. So
20. So that you have all of this 20-year perspective. I mean, I think all of us here. And obviously the big questions that keep emerging with mobility is that the other global issues around climate change, digitization, so what are the different pressures that make think what is obsolete or what is still required? So you're very curious on what continues to be seen as really a very important priority and the reasons behind that. So you see clear new trends as well emerging, that it's not just going through the motions. It's not just like always.
No. And I think we can do a parallel between the city's priorities in terms of cultural policies and their priorities in terms of mobility of artists and culture professional. The first point is that culture is increasingly linked to other urban policies, like urban renewal, the renewal of public spaces, especially since COVID. And this also is reflected in priorities linked to the mobility of artists. So a city is very aware that they have to develop new types of interventions, for example, in the public space, and will support local actors working in that field to learn abroad, and will also invite more artists from abroad to do so. The second one that we really see is increasing links between culture and cultural policies and activities and climate change. And I think this could be the topic of another webinar, because there's really this willingness for cities to be greener in their cultural practices. And here I will share a link later on, because we've launched a nice initiative called the Call to Action on Sustainable Culture, signed by 60 mayors already. And one of the priority of this call to action is to rethink mobility and reduce carbon emissions due to the mobility of artists and audience. So how does this translate into the support that is given to artists and culture professionals? I know On the Move is working a lot on this. So how do you still welcome artists from abroad while being greener in the transport mode, for example? That's a big challenge. And a third trend.
That's the jigs.
Yes. And a big trend now, and I'm coming back to the international relations context, is supporting artists at risk. So here, that's very much linking culture to democracy, because the several ongoing crises, I mean, the Ukrainian one, of course, but the Middle East one, are leading to an increase in inquiry and applications, especially from the Middle East, but also from Africa, which means that the mobility of international artists and cities welcoming these international artists, it's becoming increasingly difficult due to sometimes visa restriction. For example, we were told by several German cities that many artists at risk are initially seeking refuge in third countries before they can enter Germany. The city of Munich, for example, is helping a lot through residencies for artists at risk, and that's just one example. So they do provide international artists who are at risk of persecution or oppression or fleeing from war, with the opportunity to live and work in Munich for 1 year. The city provides accommodation support and a monthly allowance of 1,200 euro. That's a very concrete example. And the city also supports writers. Someone was asking questions about literature. So the city also supports writers in exile by providing 2 apartments for free. So the city owns 2 apartments that are offered to writers in exile. And the very last point is also the fact that cities are also grouping in the ICON network that you may have heard about, the International Cities of Refuge Network. And they protect and support persecuted writers, journalists, and artists. So that's also an interesting source linking culture, mobility of artists and culture professional, and democracy. So I think that's for the overview.
Thank you. That's brilliant, Julie, and it's very helpful that you are so precise with that, and obviously that there are so many resources as well that are backing up what you say. So we will come back to you because you are opening up very interesting points. But let's move on also to the next complements and brings race here. So I would like to move on to Kelly Diapouli, and I have as well for quite some time because she has been involved in several editions of the European Capital of Culture program. I mean, I met her in the context of her role during the bid stages for Elefsina that ended up presenting the program in 2023 and artistic directions there in the early stages. And now she's the artistic director of Larnaka 2030. So obviously being part of this initiative, 40 years of European Capitals of Culture, over 80 cities and counting, you know, it's a very, very, very broad, it's a version of a network. We can call it as well, a network of cities in a way, going through very different cycles, but consolidating themselves as valuable for the future of Europe and going at the moment through the whole process of revision of a legal framework, because after 2033, there will be a legal framework. So all kinds of conversations are going on around ECoC-related networks, including Culture Next, that Kelly is also part of, ECoC family. I know that Eurocities has also provided a really interesting paper and suggestion about that future. So Kelly, how do you see these topics that we are discussing around cultural mobility for artists from a European capital of culture point of view?
So, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, everybody. Beatriz, Jordi, Julie, and Marie. It's very nice to be here with you, and thank you for the invitation. Now, regarding the capital of culture, I would say a project. I would say that maybe it's the largest EU mobility project. We know because it has big budgets. I mean, a capital of culture project has a budget of 30 to 50, 60, 70 million euros. And all projects need to have the so-called European dimension, which in practice means that they involve cooperation between artists from different EU countries, be it through invitation, be it through co-productions. So in the end, it ends up that about 50% of the artistic program involves international artists, which means that it involves cultural mobility. Another important aspect, I think, in this respect is that it extends cultural mobility in the periphery of Europe, because most of the cities that are capital of culture in this in the past decades are peripheral cities, are small cities we hardly know of, like Oulu. This year it's Oulu in Finland, Trenčín in Slovakia, and other smaller cities like Matera, like Elefsina, for example. Nobody knew Elefsina before becoming the European capital of culture. So it's really interesting, the fact that we are talking about cultural mobility, not only the big centers, because usually, in the sector, cultural mobility is very much focused on the big centers, on the big metropolis, where the big cultural organization and artistic bodies operate, like the national theaters, the operas, the big festivals, and so on. And the well-known artists. But in the context of the European Capital of Culture, cultural mobility really extends and reaches out to artists and cultural operators that live in the periphery. And it also extends a lot, not just to the big names and renowned international artists, but also emerging artists, mid-career artists. So in this respect, I would say that the capitals of culture are really a catalyst for the democratization of cultural mobility. And I mean, I can give many examples. I don't know if it is it's necessary now, but maybe later in the conversation. Another important aspect is because the capital of culture are happening in such small cities, they all involve capacity building program for the local cultural sector. And these capacity building programs focus mainly on networking and on international mobility. So, for example, in Elefsina, we had a very detailed, I think, and coherent capacity building program that involved cooperation with European international networks such as IETM, the International Network for Contemporary Performing Arts. They did their summer campus there with the European Festivals Association and the Festival Academy. with United Cities and local governments, with Culture Action Europe, with On the Move. With On the Move, we have created, we run a program on internationalization of practices for 15 local cultural operators that lasted for 1 year. And throughout this year, they were receiving mentoring on how to internationalize their careers. So all this activity empowers mobility and empowers the local sector to internationalize their practices. In Larnaka, for example, we already have an artist in residency space that has already hosted more than 30 international artists. And within the capacity building program, we are setting a new fund of 500,000 euros that will be specially allocated for mobility. So giving grants to artists and cultural operators to travel abroad, to either for research or for networking or for whatever other reason that helps them develop their careers and develop partnerships that will then bring projects into the overall program. And finally, I would say there is also a very interesting aspect in the capitals of culture in the legacy, because we see many times that also in the legacy, there is a big focus on continuing this internationalization of practices. So Timisoara, for example, after the end of the title year, they have invested, I think, more than €1 million, and they are continuing to do so in funding just mobility of artists and mobility of works. So works from Timisoara to travel abroad, or works from other EU countries to be presented in Timisoara. So overall, I think that the ECoC, the European Capitals of Culture, are maybe the strongest project at EU level that with respect to empowering cultural mobility. Now, regarding the things that Julie has brought about, of course, the Green Deal is a big priority, and this it creates many questions, brings about many questions, especially for places, remote places or islands like Cyprus, where there is no other way to access the country than via plane. So I think we need to rethink green mobility, or rethink the relationship between green mobility and social justice, because I feel that that there is a very high pressure on green mobility, which is natural, but on the other hand, we are running the risk of having some places disconnected, and this would be and create inequalities for the artists and cultural operators within the EU, if we are very strict on the prerequisites of green mobility.
Yes. And again, everyone, amazing resources are also being shared with you on the chat, just along the points that Kelly was making. I think, Kelly, what you're raising is quite when we judge the value of also the smaller cities. So obviously with Eurocities, what we had is a network of the larger cities. In the European Capital of Culture program, you have this whole pot that ranges from the multi-million inhabitant cities to cities of a few thousand inhabitants in very diverse locations. So that really brings another dimension into how we judge how you make a difference, especially if you are also talking about capacity building. So obviously, for some cities, it's not enough. And what is interesting is when we debate, do we need this kind of initiative? For the larger cities, more established, maybe they are frustrated and they would talk about too tiny the budgets and not enough ambition on international relations. But for others, it's absolutely transformative. And I guess the value is to actually be together and operating at the same level. Conscious with time, and before we move to Jordi, maybe just one additional question to what you're saying in terms of those reference for you. So obviously the fact that there are 40 years of trajectory and so many cities before you, have you seen then in terms of exemplars or reference that are particularly, that you see as best practice for you in terms of the cities or the models that you think, yes, this is what can work and may sustain in 2026, or yeah, this is exactly what we want to avoid? How is that for you in terms of that knowledge transfer or lack of?
Yeah, we all know. I mean, it's common knowledge that the European capitals of culture involve a lot of troubles. There is, there are problems, and not all, and most of the times, the program and the whole vision is not realized as planned. On the other hand, I think that we need to see more openly the question of evaluation on the success of the capitals of culture. And I will bring one. I think that we are many times when we are evaluating the success, we are missing many aspects and many points that are important. And I will bring an example from Elefsina. Elefsina was again a kind of trouble case. It doesn't have a very concrete legacy. I mean, there is not a legacy organization left behind, etc. But I will tell you something that is never referred in the evaluation, and which for me is very important. Elefsina was the first time designated after the first time that in Greece we had a competition for the designation of the European Capital of Culture. The previous time it was the Ministry of Culture that was allocating, that was designated a specific city and just announcing that to Brussels. So the Ministry of Culture was designating the big cities: Athens, Thessaloniki, Patras, etc. In the competition, there were 14 cities, most of them big cities. And finally, it was Elefsina that got the title. And this was a shock for the Greek reality, because cultural operators, city authorities, they couldn't understand why and how is this possible. So because they couldn't understand very well, I think the EU priorities and the cultural policy in and how cultural policies in the rest of Europe operate. But what is the result is that now that, because in some years Greece is going to start again the new competition, and I know for sure that there are already small scale cities that are preparing already for the next round. So to make the long story short, I think that a very important legacy of Elefsina is that Elefsina has released the collective imaginary of cities and their will to invest in culture. And this is invaluable. And this is also this empowers cultural democracy. This empowers culture decentralization. You will not find this in any report, or there will be no mention. So I think that in Europe, we live in very different contexts. And it's very, difficult many times to understand the local context of different places. So in this respect, I think that the Capital of Culture project is a project with the way it operates, with a rotation and every time in a different country.
Yes.
It is a project that empowers cultural democracy, even in the cases that it's not very successful in terms
Yes.
of evaluation.
Thank you. And yes, it's another point we talked around the issues on green agenda and climate change. On the evaluation front, we could also have a whole series of sessions on how we do, what we fail to measure or not. Comparing also with what Julie was mentioning earlier with Eurocities, I'm always very impressed with the quality of reporting from Eurocities. ECoC, despite 40 years, we could still move upwards and be more ambitious on how we evaluate and tell stories of value. And it's a conversation that needs to keep going on. And for that, the next panelist actually can tell us some more, because Jordi Pascual, again, a very dear colleague that, I mean, I think we have been interacting at least since 2004, for sure, that has been working very hard on these approaches also to reporting, to documenting, to proving value and having this very coherent, committed, long-term view. And yes, how you express value, how you capture, how you provide the evidence. With Jordi, we met in Barcelona, that is both of our hometowns, in the context of the Universal Forum of Cultures. Again, one of these mega events that are created to change the world, not supposedly to change the world, with big agendas, not a very clear legacy, actually, but yeah, the ideas were there. And maybe Jordi is one of the legacies of the forum, probably one of the most important, because of the conversations that were triggered on notions like cultural rights, on the issue, the role of culture in sustainable development, urban cultural policy. So all of those topics, they were quite in their infancy back in the 2000s, 1990s and before. There were a lot of initiatives, but in terms of codifying it and becoming it clear, that was a point of departure that I think was a milestone in some ways. So we have UCLG, and you have your role as coordinator of the culture committee there. And obviously now we have the global agenda, because with the previous two contributions has been the European take and European networks. Although I can say that from the ECoC perspective, this network is broadening up and reaching out across the globe, sometimes with very well structured initiatives like with Japan and increasingly also with the African continent. But in the case of UCLG, that's at the very heart and at the core of how the network operates. So I would like to ask Jordi to start. Maybe you can tell us just a little bit more also about UCLG itself, in the way that we have heard about Eurocities and the ECoC program, and then to provide that mobility. So the topic that we are discussing at hand from a UCLG perspective. Please.
Moltes gracias, Beatriz. Thank you very much, Beatriz. Again, thank you to Marie and Johan for having invited us to this webinar, and Beatriz for the conduction. I'm very happy to share the panel with Kelly and Julie. UCLG is one of the worst acronyms in the history of communication. It stands for United Cities and Local Governments. Brief United Cities, if you want to make a parallel to the United Nations, this is what the mayors at the end of the 1990s were seeking. The network of local governments global. The network that connects the challenges of democracy development with the place and the people. United Cities, yes, born in 2004, but with a background at least since the late 19th century, when academics and activists were discussing this alignment between, yes, development, democracy, rights, and people. The time in which so-called nation states were built, leaving, let's be explicit, leaving behind many areas in countries. So the municipalist movement, the one that yes, I will use the word subsidiarity, but this is interesting. Promoting subsidiarity to the top. All decisions that affect citizens should be taken at the suitable scale, and there are many decisions that can be taken locally. In 2004, United Cities is born with a strong cultural program. Not all, not the United Nations cannot say the same. United Cities is born with Agenda 21 for culture and with a very explicit metaphor. Culture is the fourth pillar of sustainable development, not an instrument for economic development, not an instrument of fundamentalism, either it is national, religious, or economic. Fourth, in order of appearance, as in a movie, not in hierarchy. A seat at the table. Today, impossible to understand the world unless the culture, component, vector, sphere, dimension, pillar is not the best metaphor, but you understand perfectly, a seat at the table, because the challenges we have as a humanity, how we understand heritage, how we create things together, how we respect, promote, understand diversity, how evidence and critical knowledge are the currency of human exchanges, how we appreciate beauty, how we celebrate life and seasons with our rituals, old and new. This needs to be at the center of the conversation. So we are born with this strong, very strong message. And what we have tried is to translate this message with tools that can be used by cities that are not familiar with cultural policies and with cities that are the world champions of cultural policies. Mexico City, Malmö, Dublin, Barcelona, Elefsina, Larnaka, but also Brazzaville, La Plata, Jinju, etc. And we have tried to renew our frame every 5 years, with the Agenda 21 for Culture in 2004 to the Culture 21 Plus in 2025, our toolkit of more than 230 questions that act as a mirror of local cultural policies. Local cultural policies based on cultural rights, not based on city attractiveness, based on the connection between cultural rights and the other dimensions of sustainable development. Our Culture 21 Plus includes actions, Action 29.5 and 29.8, on mobility of artists, on the protection of artists and cultural professionals at risk or persecuted. In 2020, we approved the Rome Charter, explicitly mentioning the need to support international cooperation and the protection of artists at risk. And in our work, we support on a daily basis these global exchanges. We have supported peer learning activities on anti-racism in Malmö with participants from South America, other cities in Europe, on rural tourism and creativity in Portugal, in Barcelona on interculturality, in Jeju with the Korea with the Global Youth Creative Residencies, in Ramallah, by the way, one of the best cultural policies ever seen in Palestine, Ramallah in Palestine. Two elements that connect what wonderful speeches by Julie and Kelly have just said, to a couple of challenges in how I see the cultural and artistic mobility. And then I will mention also the culture goal. But in 3 minutes, I am done. The challenges, the need to ensure there is capacity in the local coordination teams that are in charge of mobility. say historically, the agencies in charge of artistic mobility are national agencies or the associations of professionals. Example, the IFLA, the International Federation of Libraries, has an exchange program since practically its birth a century ago. So civil society has this historically. But yes, cities are new actors, more and more active with more and more resources. And the need to guarantee that the hosting team has the capacity to suitably host the visiting is very important, and it does not always happen. And second, which does not always happen either, is the connection between the work of the artists and the cultural life of the city. In a cultural rights perspective, we believe that it is fundamental to promote mobility. It is also fundamental that the artists that stay 1 month, 1 year in a city are connected so that the people living in the place can understand why this contribution is valuable. And yes, I will mention the monster. In the moment in which far right and extreme right is poisoning the debate and is undermining the international cooperation, to be generous in the description of what they are doing, we need to make sure the connection local-global is explicit, because scientifically it has always been important in the life of cities. A city cannot be explained without being explicit on migration and mobility. It's a mobility program, a city. But when policies become, say, solid and long-term, the connection between the global and the local needs to be as explicit as possible. From the artists and cultural professionals that are at the early stages of a cultural project, say the cutting edge residents or exploration of a field, to the final stages in which dissemination or evaluation are included. Final element, the culture goal. Yes, you all know that there is not a culture goal in the Sustainable Development Goals frame in the Agenda 2030. This is a huge failure of all. In 2013, 2014, a number of civil society organizations, including Cultural Action Europe, representing all the European networks, and including certainly us, UCLG, we wrote to UNESCO, we wrote to the working group on the post-2015 at that time. We said, there is room for you to analyze a culture goal, but ambassadors in New York did not understand the value of culture. They said, tragically, they said, culture is not goalable, culture is not globable. And this is, ladies and gentlemen, in 2013, when somebody working in New York says this, it's a catastrophe for the whole cultural policy domain. We said, okay, we not agree. We published a document, Culture Goal, in 2013. And we did it again in 2022, when UNESCO was courageous to call for a Mondia Cult conference in Mexico City in 2022, September. And we went to the details in Barcelona in September 2025, when we published the Culture Goal, this, with the narrative, with 10 targets, and with a number of indicators. One of the 10 targets is on artists' mobility, connected explicitly with target 1 on cultural rights, or target 7 indigenous peoples, or target 8 environmental action. This is a very important battle. We do not know what will happen after the 2030. There will be an agenda, or regional agendas, or the continuation of the current one. But this struggle needs to be undertaken, needs to be very open, and needs to include the mobility of artists in one of the targets, as one of the elements of advocacy of the cultural actors. I think it was a bit too long. and I didn't say everything what I wanted to say, but Beatriz, back to you.
Thank you, Jordi. No, and you have covered a lot of ground. In fact, you have covered two of the questions I wanted also to press you on. And I see that questions are really emerging. So people are really keen now to come along with all of us. So maybe just before I open the floor, is that point around those networks of networks. And how do you see, after all your efforts and experiences, the way or the possibility of alignment between different networks? Is there a risk of clashing, of replicating, or are you seeing increasingly the capacity to align, to support each other, to have better methods to refer to each other's resources, and avoid the risk that is too much noise and too many competing agendas, especially on the mobility front? Are things aligning with established networks internationally?
I'm not sure I'm able to answer to that question, Beatriz. I am not. I do not know well the domain of cultural mobility. In the preparation of this webinar, I have read two great reports written by On the Move. Let me be very clear. The one that analyzed the mobility schemes of Nantes, and the one that analyzed the role of cities in the protection of artists at risk, which mainly talks about ICORN, and I have to mention here the name of Jordi Baltà, who mentioned the existence of these reports to me a few days ago. So I could not go in details on mobility. I could certainly answer this question by saying that networks exist to cover a need, and here we feel comfortable being the global network of cities and local governments, working also with regional networks like the Association Internationale de Maires Francophones, with the Commonwealth Global Forum, with ECLE that works in the realm of environmental action, and with the civil society. I forgot to mention that what we offer as a mirror to cities, it is not to evaluate the local government, it is to offer a mirror for both local government and civil society. And in our recommendations, we are very explicit that nothing happens nothing meaningful and long-term can happen in the cultural policy of a city unless the civil society is empowered, is involved, it is the center. So we are working mutatis mutandis. We are doing the same globally, working with the IFLA, with ICOM, with ICOMOS, with Culture Action Europe, because this battle for a culture goal needs local governments, yes, civil society, and some national champions that are already in place. Brazil, Mexico, Italy, Thailand.
Yes.
Some African, like Kenya or the Republic of Congo, some others. Not sure I asked that question, Beatriz, but...
No, but very good. And again, the key thing is that on any topic that we treat, I think now there is a role that we should appoint. We should have people in all our networks that has the time to do that transversal comparison, because the information is there, and to advance any agenda, the key is to detect whether at times we are contradicting each other, no? So whether as a sector there are actual commonalities, or whether our recommendations and our perspectives clash, and that makes it hard to advance certain aspects. Well, let's have time now for the floor, because I think people are keen to come along, to join us. And I'm trying to see how we work on this. I have seen a few questions there, and I don't know if there was Marie or people on the move that are also going to help me navigate requests. Also to say chapeau to those that are really responding to resources so quickly. It's been amazing to see a mention on the floor that then translates into a link on the chat. Let's make sure the chat is protected, and I guess that maybe people can access it after we close. I don't know if we can make sure it doesn't disappear with Zoom today. Right, so let's identify some of the questions that I have seen. And obviously any of you that would like to put them on the floor directly, you're also welcome. If you raise your hand, I will try to see. So at the moment, I'm just looking through the chat. Yes, so I have, for instance, a question from Marwan Hassin. So you tell us, as a cultural manager with over 13 years experience, I have faced various challenges related to artist mobility, particularly concerning visa issues and funding constraints. How do artists and cultural managers address and overcome these challenges? So let's see in terms of those that have had the direct experience with that. Who among our panelists might want to take on that very specific question first? It's all around, issues of visas. Yes, Kelly?
It is an issue. It is a big issue, especially with we are facing it every time when artists from non-EU members are involved. There is not one answer, I think. Maybe we should say here that On the Move has done a considerable work on guides for cultural mobility that can help cultural operators navigate different issues also regarding visa and artists. But in the end of the day, you need to be very resourceful, to be honest, and have also alternatives, plan Bs for online format, or find ways that if the visa is not given, find ways that artists can participate in different formats. And another thing that big organizations like the European Capitals of Culture can do and are doing, I mean, in Elefsina, we were doing that, is have direct agreements with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to enable getting the visa for the artists you want and cultural operators you want to invite. But this is not something that overall every cultural organization can do. I mean, smaller organizations, but the big ones like the ECoCs or maybe big festivals, I think this could be a solution.
Thank you. And yes, and as we figure out the questions, and also we try to see how we make the best use of our time and the panelists here. Also, to be clear on the purpose of the webinar, no? So we are not just an info session. What matters is just about discuss and help you understand policy strategies by cities. So there are going to be, I'm hearing from the team that there will be a sharing of open calls in the chat, which will involve cities and mobility support. But also here, what we want is to talk on the more broader also issues around strategic thinking for all of you. But let's see, I'm retracing some of the questions. They're quite specific. So, for instance, in terms of dispositives, no. So, if there have been specific mentions of dispositives for mobility of artists, I mean, I think we might have covered some of that partially. I don't know if there is any other concrete example that could come along from any of you. So it was the dispositives, and also about advisors. So are there advisors that can help develop artistic projects to choose the best strategy and resources? I mean, again, we're talking about capacity building, no, and the fact that so many of the cities that go through initiatives, getting to that point. But yes, I guess there are plenty, no, out there. I don't know if also from a Eurocities perspective and more broadly.
I can try to respond. I think one thing that I would like to encourage to do for all the participants is don't be afraid to contact directly the culture and arts department of the city where you live or you work, because they do have such support program, and sometimes communication isn't that easy. So, I mean, they are public servants, and it is also part of their job to respond to those very practical questions. That's part of their everyday work. So do not hesitate to do that. And some of them organize info sessions as well. So it's important that you let us know that you are interested.
Yes, and we go back to this issue, and I'm very keen for the panelists also to keep coming in on how we deal with all of these mountains of information. So much has been produced, but again, for all of you here, it feels like a real labyrinth. So it's how it gets correct. What are the entry points? How do we make sure across all the, regardless of your point of start of departure, that you can reach any of the resources, even if that resource has not been created by the body or group that you have knocked at the door in the first place. So we have questions as well, very specific about mobility and the kind of mobility initiatives that we have mentioned, whether they include countries like the Ivory Coast or Benin. So yeah, now going into the intercontinental relations, that would be interesting to get some reactions on that. It's like, yes, how diverse is the loop, how much it depends on the vision of specific artistic directors or depending on programs, or in the case of UCLG and other bodies, you know, how far do you go in your African continent connections? Does any of you have any reactions to this kind of specific locations?
I could say that generally speaking, we don't we have a focus, a geographical focus. As Larnaka 2030, we have a geographical focus that is very much in the Middle East because it's our neighborhood. So indeed, we focus a lot in. But from there on, as you know, Beatriz, and everybody knows, but probably there are also initiatives that come outside from the cities, like the EU Japan Fest. This is an initiative coming from Japan, and they cooperate with all the European capitals of culture, investing considerable budget in funding mobility of artists and mobility of projects. So it's a question many times not only of where the capital of culture focuses on. I mean, for us, I can say, as I said, we focus a lot extra EU on the region on the MENA region. As other ECoCs, I think that are borderline, they focus on their border regions. But also, if we have here policymakers and cultural manager, it is interesting to think also in your countries how a way to work and to cooperate to create cultural cooperation at EU level is the capitals of culture. So there could be initiatives coming from different countries, like the one coming from Japan.
Yes, thank you. And I see Jordi that wanted to comment, because it's true. I mean, again, this is all about the overarching strategic level. And I think it was you, Jordi, that was mentioning this. At times we do the kind of one-off, but also how are we thinking of the broader angles and what might be missing in every operation. With UCLG, you have been exploring certain work. I know that the British Council, from a UK perspective, also did that for UK Cities of Culture and ECoCs. They also had close-ups on different continents. But yeah, let me let Jordi tell you more on that front.
Cities in Africa and cultural professionals and artists in African cities, we know they experience the difficulties in when they are invited, visas and this is a huge problem. From an institutional point of view, two elements. what we notice is a growing interest from capitals, European capitals, to connect with other continents, especially Africa, but also Latin America. Bourges, Namur, the candidacy of Montpellier was very strong in connecting Montpellier with Africa. The Spanish candidacy, the Canary Islands candidacy of Las Palmas, the same. We believe that the new frame for the European Capitals of Culture should be more ambitious on that. And that, in fact, this message of connecting Europe to the world should have been in the current frame, the one that was defined between 2013 and 2012 and 2013. So it was a missing opportunity too. But certainly the number of initiatives from Europe to involve other continents is growing. Let me also mention the work of Sylvia Aman in the deconfining process that connected several European initiatives with some African residencies and local programs connecting with working with creativity, especially in Kigali, also in Yopougon, in Brazzaville. Here, let me also mention the work of Culture et Développement, Francisco d'Almeida and Valeria Marcolin, who have been working in this field for 60 years now. So this is one element. The second one is that here in UCLG, we are trying to connect all the capitals of culture that exist regionally with this program, Capitals of Culture Working Together. We have tried to support especially the new African Capital of Culture initiative with difficulties, but it's going to happen. It is happening, and it's going to be stronger in the future. But there is also the Mediterranean Capital of Culture and Dialogue, led by the Anna Lindh Foundation, extraordinary initiative, and a new initiative being born in the Americas, in the Mercociudades network. Yes. So this our question was, can we invite the European capitals and all the rest to think together on the culture goal, on this huge challenge that we have as a community? So this is why we launched this program, and we are closing the first phase on April the 28th. So you're invited also to come to this closing webinar.
Thank you. I mean, this brings many different layers to the discussion around how you debate place, focus, networks, what we call the usual suspects, so know what kinds of interactions are always the same, in which cases you might challenge that and broaden up your perspective on internationalization. It is true that with a specific program like the European Capital of Culture program, the big debate was what we mean by European dimension, and is the European dimension only around European-based countries, or migrations and movements. Europe is also its connections with the rest of the world, which became very, very apparent in countries like Portugal, where the European dimension is an Atlantic projection, or places that now through Brexit have got out, like the UK, where also that international projection and European dimension connected with Shanghai, connected with New York, it's also Europe. It's a Europe that connects with other continents. So the big question is that, where does the initiative come from? And I'm trying now to retrace, because within UNESCO, people like Mate Kovacs, I remember, in terms of the African Center for Cultural Policies, and evolved in the 90s and so on, is also where the initiatives come from. And who are you responding to? Who initiates the conversation? And maybe it's useful then to refer to the other types of events and networks involving mobility that are out there. In my case, I work a lot with the Olympic movement and the Olympic Games. And obviously the big challenge is how to do more work in the African continent. I mean, Dakar will have the Youth Olympic Games. And it's going to be really, really interesting in how this has happened and how those interactions, those mobilities have been possible in the context of sport. And what can we learn within the culture and arts sector, or how has been done with Olympic solidarity, with really, really very hard long-term initiatives to ensure that everyone has a chance. So I leave it there in terms of how we have to keep rethinking what our networks are, and also go beyond the arts and culture sector, in which cases with education, with the sport, you might also find a good reference. And this brings me to another very, very valuable question that has to do around people with disabilities. It's another area that the Olympic movement has been very strong on. How do we feel about the cultural sector and mobility for artists with disabilities? Do we have any responses, any comments or examples from our panelists? Kelly?
Yes, it's very high on the agenda in recent years. Also, we see it in all EU funded programs, Erasmus, Creative Europe. There is extra help. There is extra funding for people with disabilities. But I think, generally speaking, it is one of the focus area. It is a strong focus area in recent years. Also, producing, touring works of artists with disabilities. And most importantly, I think the most important aspect in this debate is how we produce works that are accessible by design. So from the moment that you start thinking of the work, of the creation, how you make it accessible. It is in terms of from a more institutional or culture programming perspective, you find it in all recent European capitals of culture. There are programs that especially address artists with disabilities. So I think that we are progressing quite fast in this path. Of course, there are many things to be done, but I think it's very high on the agenda.
Thank you, Kelly. And I have now lost my screen with the panelists just because I was trying to see whether anyone was trying to raise a hand. I was very keen to see some faces from our delegates, but now I'm missing the panelists. So I don't know if Julie or Jordi, if there are any other comments on that front. You are also welcome to take the floor. And if not, I'm looking into the time because we have around 10 more minutes for the session, and then I'm going to bring Marie from some operational matters. So if I don't see, there was another very specific question that is around guides. So again, if there are guides on mobility opportunities with open calls, etc., that are being mentioned, so to understand. So I think there probably are some, and it's what we were hearing before, that On the Move will be producing or sharing with you some of these open calls. But I don't know if there is any other reference on guides for mobility opportunities that has not been mentioned so far. You are also very welcome to mention this. Right. I don't know what is happening. So if we don't have more points, I would probably like to invite also the panelists to interact with each other. In terms of things you have heard from each other that might have raised or triggered any wish to push further. Is there something you would like also to revisit with those 5 minutes that we have on that broader strategic framework for mobility programs and city-led strategies?
I would go because probably Beatriz can see. I would like to revisit this. It doesn't relate very directly with city-led cultural mobility, but I would like to revisit the question about the culture goal that Jordi brought about, because it is indeed very important. And it is something that also within the culture, within Culture Next network, we have discussed a lot. I think, Jordi, I don't remember if you were here. You were there, yes?
I were not, but I followed the debates with Marta Llobet of our team. She was there, yes.
So, and there were many reactions to that, you know, culture per se is not necessarily good, because good meaning that we have seen many times that culture is used for propaganda that is mistreated. So that maybe what we should advocate for is cultural democracy. And I would very much like to. I'm very interested to hear your response to that.
The response is that education has also been used for this purpose, or forests, or life underwater, or health. I cannot see any one of the current SDGs not to have been instrumentalized for autocracies to repress freedoms of people. So the proposal of the culture goal, it is very clearly anchored in human rights.
Mm-hmm.
And this is clear. I mean, very explicit. Cultural democracy, you suggest, Kelly, is the 10 targets are pro-cultural democracy. The fact that there is a culture goal, if there is a culture goal, it will allow progress for those that connect cultural practices and cultural policies with sustainability, with the future of our societies, with the rights and freedoms of the new generations, in a field that is contested. I think that one of the elements that we learned in the last 10 to 15 years, and certainly with the monsters that are surrounding us, is that, well, they are using freedom and some key concepts that are very dear to us, that belong to us, to justify oppression. And okay, yes, but it was hidden in the cultural policy narratives, but this is not new. It has been in the 18th century, 19th century, with, let me be also explicit here, the Catholic Church, and the importance of Catholic Church in Europe in the 19th century, you all know. So the cultural activists for cultural democracy, not using this word in the late 19th century or beginning of the 20th century, had to struggle for their freedom. So we are, mutatis mutandis, the scale. Yeah, we need that culture goal so that we can openly defend the connection between culture and other public policies, and the fact that we need very strong cultural policies to serve the freedoms of people all around the world.
I can also add that from the Eurocities perspective, increasing links between culture and democracy in the future Capitals of Culture program is one of the requests we have made to the European Commission. And it's also all the more important because we know that, at least in Europe, cities there are no extreme local governments, no extremes in the leadership of local governments. At least this might be changing very soon. But now cities also are becoming super diverse. And it's really important, especially in European countries where national governments are becoming extremely right-wing, that we really support mayors in in ensuring the rule of law is still implemented in the activities of the city governments. I'm just sharing an example. It's a delegation of Eurocities mayors who attended the Pride in Budapest last year that was forbidden by the national government. So there is also a growing support between mayors to really help each other. And that's also something that we are further working on at Eurocities.
Thank you. And I can testify that, and it's an interesting, also I see that also, I think we have Marie here from the European Commission also observing, in terms of initiatives like the European Capital of Culture program, where as a core topic, beyond the notion of the European dimension, that obviously is key, is that notion of cultural democracy becoming more and more. It's not just like a little thing, but something that needs to be at the heart of what the program is for. And in terms of evidence, I can tell you, even reports from Buddha in Norway, how this became such a huge area of debate, to say it's not just something nice, we need to go a bit deeper. And how, in fact, from some of the feedback that we received, is that the program could not go far enough. So it opened an appetite to discuss cultural democracy. And then there was not enough time or resources, no? And now, obviously, on the legacy front is whether these people now might have more support or skills, to become more. And also brings this to the fore, no? The fact that so many of these issues and contradictions and extremes can be addressed better if you actually see each other, if you really have the time to meet and have face-to-face conversations with those that you feel you have nothing in common with. I see, Marie, you have showed up, so maybe you can say hello briefly, Marie. Inver, I have seen you just appearing on the screen. It's really nice that you are with us today. I don't know if there is a comment that also you might want to share with us.
Yeah, just to say hello, I joined late because I had other thing this morning. This morning I'm just back from Spain from the pre-selection of cities. So we had 4 very good cities shortlisted last week. But in parallel, we are indeed busy to draft the next legal base for after 2033. And we even have a technical meeting later today with the cabinet. So that's clearly, so I have all this notion. We have a huge table with everything. And yeah, we'll make the most of all your proposals. That's clear.
Thank you. So to wrap up, because I also want to ensure that, and really wonderful that you are with us in this session. So that's also fantastic in terms of time. And Marie is going to tell us more about what happens with this as a resource for our debate. But just maybe 3 pointers in terms of strong points that have come to me hearing and listening to our fantastic panelists. So felt very encouraged from the Eurocities perspective and from Julie. So the notion that mobility programs, that is not just going through the motions, that there are new challenges, that they keep being current, that there is a clear perception of new challenges, and that cities want to make it possible for these kinds of initiatives to continue. So very reassuring in 2026 to see this, that is not just added value or the kind of thing that could be cut off if budgets become too tight, that actually there can be key and there are very clear arguments for how they can make a difference. So very valuable, the reports also available there that provide evidence and provide very strong arguments. In the case of Kelly, I thought was very enriching, really important to remember that point you make around the value of ECoCs, and that is that they bring into the same platform this enormous diversity of city types and formats. The fact that it's so geographically dispersed, that sizes vary so much, that points of departure vary so much. And it's, of course, very valuable to ensure you don't miss the big cities. Obviously, I would be concerned if the future of the ECoC program is only at the very tiny places. What is good is the mix. Bring them together to the same table, have them together with mobility programs that involve a change, between one of the most sophisticated cities in one particular country and a really tiny one, and the learning that you can make from each other. Because again, there should not be just a hierarchical thing that one knows better than the other. In some cases, actually being small and peripheral might make it easier to resolve issues that the very strongly, central and very well-resourced cities might struggle with. And obviously with Jordi is that bigger picture at the global level and how we advance those notions from cultural rights to the cultural goal, how long it takes to make the case, why you get challenged, as seeing that this is just not an area that can be dealt with, the importance to have those questions, those answers at the ready. And what is really valuable with Jordi is that if you are not taking it out of a hat, it's not just doing a PR exercise. This is backed up by a very coherent 20 years of really working very hard with many cities. Very challenging to have questionnaires that are 230 questions long, as we know. But obviously by doing that, you can go into the granularity, you can deal with the depth and the complexity of the issue. And I think that's where it matters so much to keep protecting all of these networks with all of their different capacities, and where, from a perspective of On the Move or any others, how we need to keep getting better at directing our stakeholders to each other. So don't replicate, we all have strengths. Make sure that you make the corridors, the mechanisms to find the different resources easier and easier. Because again, we were not born yesterday. No, the work is a result of very careful work. It's not ChatGPT. It has not been done in 2 seconds. It's really deep and careful assessment and interaction with many, many, many different stakeholders. So we have a couple of minutes. Marie, do you want to come in to close the session and tell us what happens next?
Thank you very much, Beatriz, for this moderation of this panel. A big thank you to Kelly and Julie and Jordi as well for their input. So what I can say, so first, this webinar was really, as you reminded as well, Beatriz, on this question of policies and strategies in relation with the roles of city in Europe, and also increasingly, as we could see, internationally in terms of support for the mobility of artists and cultural professionals. And we could see also the different realities behind this question of the mobility of artists and cultural professionals in relation with urban city agenda, in relation with their condition being at risk or with disability, in connection as well with global climate change, for instance. So we try as much as possible through this webinar to cover these different topics. We understand as well from the audience that there is also an appetite to know more about calls and funding program in relation with cities. So it's quite a good moment as well, I would say, because as you could see in the chat, there are quite, I think it's almost 10 calls at the moment that are related to cities, ECoC, like Skopje in 2028, but also there are quite a number of calls related with the CREA Art Network, which is co-funded by the European Union or by the UNESCO, also Cities of Literature, for instance. So you have also a few examples, and my colleague Bernardo also shared the newsletter and the open calls that you can find. What are the next steps? The next step, so this is a webinar which will be also the fertile ground, I would say, of upcoming policy report on the question of city-led international cultural mobility. So the learning that we had here, also enriched by other interview research by different authors, will help to also produce this report under the coordination of my colleague Johan Flock, Director of Operation at On the Move, that I would like also to thank for this, the organization of this webinar. And this report, together with this present webinar, are also co-funded by the European Commission. So thank you also for Marie Imbert, that is in charge of the coordination of the ECoC at the level of the Commission, to have taken some time also to join this conversation. Big thank you as well to our partner, Holland, for the web streaming, the National Captioning Institute, and Patria Rebecca and Sean for the real captioning, the real caption in English. And yeah, there is also my colleague Bernardo is sharing a short survey in the chat together with a link to our YouTube channel where you can connect later to see once again or to share this webinar to other colleagues. So I think I said it all. Thank you very, very much for your time. We had a good crowd of people that stay until the end, which is a very good sign as well. Until the next time to our webinar or in a mobility related project or event. Thank you.